Welcome everybody to Victor's Forbidden Desire. Please do enjoy this next video.
Blood turned the snow crimson beneath Callum Reeves as he pressed his hand against the gunshot wound tearing through his side. The blizzard screamed around him, wind cutting like razors, and through the white curtain of death, he saw the one man he swore he would never beg. Dane Harrow stood 20 paces away, coat dark against the storm, face carved from the same unforgiving stone as the mountains. Their eyes met, and Callum felt his pride shatter like ice beneath a hammer. His lips moved, words he never thought he would say, tasting like blood and defeat. "If you don't do it, I'll die. Please." The silence stretched between them, filled only by howling wind and the thunder of Callum's failing heart. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. Callum Reeves had never imagined he would die begging the man who destroyed his life. But here he was, bleeding into snow that fell so thick he could barely see Dane Harrow's face through the white fury. The bullet had punched clean through his left side, somewhere between his ribs and hip, and every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. He had pressed his bandana against the wound, but crimson soaked through instantly, steaming in the freezing air. Dane stood motionless, his broad shoulders dusted white, ice forming in his dark beard. Those cold gray eyes studied Callum like he was examining a dying animal, deciding whether it was worth the mercy of a quick end. 5 years. That was how long since they had been close enough to speak without shouting across a property line or over the barrel of a rifle. 5 years since the night Dane had taken everything that mattered. The wind shrieked and Callum's knees buckled. He caught himself with one hand in the snow, the other still pressed to his side. His vision swam and darkened at the edges. He was losing too much blood too fast, and the cold was already creeping into his bones with fingers that promised to never let go. Above him, the sky had turned the color of old iron, and snow fell in sheets so dense the world had narrowed to just this moment, just these two men, just this impossible choice. Dane finally moved, taking one step forward, then another. His boots crunched through the powder, and when he spoke, his voice was rough as gravel, scraped across wood. "Why, how bad is it?" Not a question, just flat words that carried no warmth, no concern, nothing but the cold practicality of a man deciding whether to waste effort on something already broken. Callum tried to laugh, but it came out as a wet cough that painted his lips red. "Bad enough that I'm talking to you. Bad enough that I might actually die out here if you walk away." His hand slipped in the snow and he fell to both knees, the impact sending white fire through his wounded side. The world tilted and spun, and for a moment he thought he saw his father standing in the storm, shaking his head in disappointment. Then Dane was there, dropping to one knee beside him, close enough that Callum could smell leather and pine smoke and something underneath that was just the scent of a man who lived hard and alone. Dane's hand closed around Callum's wrist, pulling it away from the wound. Cold air hit the torn flesh, and Callum gasped, trying to jerk away, but Dane's grip was iron. He peeled back the soaked bandana, and Callum watched his face, searching for any flicker of emotion. There was nothing. Just those pale eyes examining the damage like a rancher checking a fence post for rot. "You're not dying yet," Dane said finally, "but you will if we don't get you somewhere warm. The nearest doctor is in Redemption, and that's 15 miles through this storm. You wouldn't make it 5. His eyes lifted to Callum's face, and for just a heartbeat something passed between them, some ghost of what they used to be before everything turned to ash and hatred. Then it was gone, and Dane was standing, hauling Callum up with him in one smooth motion that sent agony screaming through every nerve. "There's a line shack 2 miles west," Dane said, already moving, half dragging Callum through the snow. His arm wrapped around Callum's waist, taking most of his weight, and Callum wanted to fight it, wanted to pull away and tell Dane Harrow to go straight to hell. But his body had other ideas and he sagged against the solid warmth, his own arm draping over Dane's shoulders just to keep from collapsing completely. They stumbled forward into the white wall of the blizzard. Callum's boots dragged trenches through the snow and each step felt like walking on knives. The cold had gone past pain into numbness, and he could not feel his fingers anymore, could not feel his feet. Just the fire in his side and the iron presence of Dane beside him, relentless as the winter itself. Time stopped meaning anything. There was only white and wind, and the mechanical drag of one foot in front of the other. Callum's thoughts began to drift, memories bleeding into the present like watercolors running together. He remembered being 14, following Dane through these same mountains, learning to track elk and read the weather in the shape of clouds. Dane had been 18 then, already a man while Callum was still growing into his height, and Callum had worshipped him the way boys worship anyone who seems bigger than the world. Then he remembered being 19 and watching Dane ride away from the Reeves Ranch with Callum's father's signature on a bill of sale that should never have existed. The West Pasture, the good grazing land with the year-round creek, gone because Dane had lied about what happened that night in town, because Dane had chosen ambition over friendship, and Callum had been too young, too powerless to stop it. The hatred rose fresh and hot even through the cold and the blood loss. Callum wanted to shove Dane away, wanted to spit curses and accusations, but his mouth would not work right and his vision kept fading to gray. He felt himself slipping, his weight growing heavier, and Dane's arm tightened around him with bruising force. "Stay with me," Dane growled close to his ear. "Don't you dare give up now. We're almost there." The words held command, expectation, and underneath something that might have been worry if it came from anyone else. But this was Dane Harrow, who felt nothing for anyone except himself, so it had to be something else. Probably just not wanting to waste the effort of dragging a corpse through a blizzard. Then through the whiteout, Callum saw the dark shape of a structure. The line shack was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, built decades ago by sheep herders who used to summer their flocks in these high meadows. Nobody had used it in years, but it was shelter, and right now, that was worth more than gold. Dane kicked the door open and pulled Callum inside. The wind howled in protest, and snow swirled across the rough plank floor before Dane slammed the door shut and dropped the wooden bar across it. Darkness swallowed them whole. The only sound was their ragged breathing and the muffled shriek of the storm outside. Callum felt himself being lowered to the floor, his back against the wall. His legs would not hold him anymore, and the wound in his side had gone from fire to ice, which he knew was a bad sign. His whole body shook with tremors he could not control, and his teeth chattered so hard he bit his tongue. Through the darkness he heard Dane moving, boots scraping wood, the rustle of old straw, then the scratch of a match, and sudden light flared, painful after the black. Dane had found an old oil lamp somehow still with fuel, and the flame painted the small space in warm gold. The shack was maybe 10 feet square, empty except for ancient straw scattered in one corner and a few broken tools rusting against the far wall. But it had a roof and 4 walls, and that made it paradise. Dane crouched in front of Callum, the lamplight turning his face into planes of shadow and bronze. He pulled his knife from his belt, and Callum tensed, some primal part of his brain screaming danger, even though he knew Dane was not going to kill him. Not like this. Not when he had just hauled him 2 miles through hell to save his life. The knife sliced through Callum's coat, his shirt, laying open the wound. Dane examined it with the same cold focus as before, his fingers pressing around the entry hole, and Callum hissed through his teeth. "The bullet went clean through," Dane said. "That's something, but you've lost too much blood and you're freezing." His eyes lifted to Callum's face. We need to get you warm or the cold will kill you before the wound does." Callum nodded, or tried to. His head felt too heavy for his neck. His whole body felt too heavy, like he was made of lead instead of flesh. Dane stood and moved to the door. He opening it just enough to reach out and scoop snow into his canteen. He brought it back and held it over the lamp flame, melting it into water. While he waited, he shrugged out of his heavy coat and then pulled off his own shirt, revealing the hard planes of his chest and the old scars that marked a life lived rough. Callum stared, his foggy brain taking too long to understand what Dane was doing. Then Dane poured the barely warm water over a strip torn from his shirt and began cleaning the wound, his touch surprisingly gentle despite the calluses on his palms. The cloth dragged across torn flesh, and Callum groaned, his back arching, but Dane's free hand pressed him flat against the wall. "Hold still," Dane ordered. "I need to see if there's anything inside." His fingers probed the wound, and Callum saw stars, his vision whiting out as pain crashed through him in waves. But Dane was thorough, and when he finally pulled back, his hand came away clean. No fabric, no fragments. "You got lucky." "Lucky," Callum gasped. "That what you call this?" His laugh turned into a cough and he tasted copper. Dane wrapped the wound with more strips from his ruined shirt, binding it tight enough to slow the bleeding. Then he sat back on his heels and looked at Callum with an expression that was impossible to read. "The bleeding stopped for now, but you're still in trouble," Dane said quietly. "Your lips are blue and you can't stop shaking. That's your body shutting down from the cold. We need to get your core temperature up fast or you're not going to make it through the night." Callum understood the words, but they seemed to come from very far away. He was so tired. His eyes kept trying to close, and staying awake felt like trying to hold back a river with his bare hands. Through the exhaustion, he felt Dane's hands on him again, this time pulling off his ruined coat and the remains of his shirt. The cold air hit his bare skin, and he tried to protest, but his mouth would not form words. Then Dane was pressed against him, skin to skin, wrapping both their coats around them like a cocoon. The heat of another body was shocking after so much cold, and Callum jerked, some instinct making him try to pull away. But Dane's arms locked around him, holding him close, and Dane's voice was rough in his ear. "Stop fighting. This is the only way. Your body can't warm itself anymore, so you need mine." Callum's face was pressed against Dane's bare chest, and he could feel the steady thunder of Dane's heart, could smell sweat and smoke and pine. It had been 5 years since they were this close, 5 years since anything but hatred passed between them, and now here they were, wrapped together in the dark with death waiting just outside the door. The wrongness of it warred with the desperate need for warmth, and slowly, Callum stopped trying to resist. Dane's body was furnace hot against his frozen skin. The heat seeped into him slowly, fighting back the ice in his veins, and Callum felt his shaking begin to ease just slightly. But consciousness was slipping away, and he could not hold on anymore. His eyes closed, and darkness pulled him under like water closing over his head. The last thing he felt was Dane's hand against the back of his neck, holding him close, and Dane's voice vibrating through his chest. "Don't you die on me. Callum Reeves, don't you dare." Then there was nothing but black and the distant howl of wind. Callum woke to pain. It started in his side, a deep throbbing ache that pulsed with every heartbeat, then spread outward until his whole body felt like one massive bruise. He tried to move, and agony lanced through him, dragging a groan from his throat. Immediately, a hand pressed against his shoulder, firm but not rough, holding him still. "Don't move yet," Dane's voice said from somewhere above him. "You'll tear the binding." Callum forced his eyes open, blinking against the lamplight that still burned low in the corner. The storm still raged outside, wind shrieking around the shack's walls, and through the gaps in the boards, he could see snow still falling thick as wool. The world beyond was white and wild and deadly. He was still wrapped in coats, still pressed against Dane's bare chest, but now he could feel the heat radiating from that body like a living fire. His own skin had gone from frozen blue to merely cold, and the shaking had stopped completely. He was alive. Against every odd, somehow he was still breathing. How long? Callum managed to rasp. His throat felt like he had swallowed sand. "Few hours," Dane answered. His hand moved to Callum's forehead, checking for fever, the touch surprisingly gentle. "The storm's still going strong. We're stuck here until it clears." He paused, his fingers trailing down to cup Callum's cheek. "But you're warmer now. Color's coming back. That's good." Callum turned his face into Dane's palm without thinking, seeking that warmth and steadiness. A memory surfaced unbidden, sharp and painful. He was 16 again, helping Dane mend fence line on the border between their properties. It had been a scorching summer day, and they had worked shirtless under the brutal sun, shoulders brushing with every movement. Dane had looked at him then, really looked, and something had passed between them that made Callum's stomach flip. Neither of them had acknowledged it, but from that day forward, everything changed. "Do you remember that summer?" Callum asked quietly, his eyes still closed. "The summer before, everything went wrong. We spent almost every day together, working the fence line, checking cattle, riding out to the far pastures." His voice grew softer. "I thought I was just following you around because I wanted to learn ranching. Took me months to realize I was following you because I couldn't stand to be away from you." Dane's hand stilled on his face. "I remember," he said, voice rough as gravel. "I remember every damn day of that summer. Remember the way you used to laugh at my terrible jokes. Remember how you would fall asleep against my shoulder on the ride home when you were too tired to sit straight. Remember thinking I was the worst kind of man for wanting what I wanted. You were barely grown, and I was supposed to be teaching you, not wanting to kiss you every time you smiled at me." The confession made Callum's breath catch. "You wanted to kiss me even then." Dane's thumb brushed across his lower lip, the touch sending heat through Callum's whole body despite the cold. "Every day," Dane admitted. "But especially that night by the creek when you looked at me like I hung the moon and told me I was the bravest man you knew. I came so close to closing that distance between us. You had my hand on your face just like this, and I could see in your eyes that you wanted it too." "I did," Callum whispered. "I wanted it so much I thought I would die from it. And when you pulled away and said we should head back, I felt like you had carved something out of my chest." His eyes opened, finding Dane's face inches from his own. "I cried myself to sleep that night trying to figure out what I had done wrong, why you didn't want me the way I wanted you." Dane's expression twisted with pain. "You didn't do anything wrong. I was the coward. I was 21 years old and terrified of what I was feeling. Terrified of ruining you, of taking advantage, of destroying both our futures for something that felt too big to control. So I put distance between us, started finding excuses not to work together, and tried to convince myself it would fade if I just stayed away long enough." He was still wrapped in coats, still pressed against Dane's bare chest, but now he could feel the heat radiating from that body like a living fire. His own skin had gone from frozen blue to merely cold, and the shaking had stopped completely. He was alive. Against every odd, somehow, he was still breathing. How long, Callum managed to rasp. His throat felt like he had swallowed sand. "Few hours," Dane answered. "Sun should be coming up soon, but we won't know it with this storm." He shifted slightly, and Callum felt every point where their bodies touched, every place where Dane's skin pressed against his. It should have felt wrong. It should have made him want to pull away, but his body was wiser than his pride, and it knew that heat meant survival. Dane reached for the canteen and brought it to Callum's lips. "Drink." Small sips. Callum obeyed, the water cool and clean, washing away the taste of blood. When he had drunk enough, Dane pulled back, and Callum finally looked at his face. In the lamplight, Dane's features seemed softer somehow, the hard edges gentled by shadow. His dark hair was still damp from melted snow, and his beard held droplets of moisture that caught the light. "Why did you help me?" Callum asked. "After everything. After what you did." He saw Dane's jaw tighten, saw something flicker through those gray eyes and disappear before he could name it. "Because leaving a man to die in the snow is something I won't do," Dane said flatly, "no matter what lies between us." His hand was still on Callum's shoulder, and his thumb moved slightly, stroking across bare skin in a gesture that seemed unconscious. "Even if that man hates me, even if I deserve it." The words hung in the small space between them. Callum wanted to argue, wanted to list every betrayal and every wrong, but exhaustion pulled at him, and the pain made thinking difficult. Instead, he just watched Dane's face, searching for the boy he used to know in the hard lines of the man. Somewhere under all that stone, there had to be something left of who Dane used to be. "You took the west pasture," Callum said quietly. "You lied about what happened in town that night, and my father believed you over me. We lost that land because of you." His voice cracked on the last word, and he hated himself for the weakness. Dane's hand stilled on his shoulder. For a long moment he said nothing. He just stared at Callum with an expression that might have been pain if Dane Harrow was capable of such a thing. Then he took a breath, and the words came slow, like each one cost him something. "I didn't lie about what happened that night," Dane said, "but I didn't tell the whole truth either." Callum's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Dane looked away, his gaze going to the lamp flame. "Your father didn't ask the right questions, and I didn't volunteer answers. That's my sin, but I never lied." Rage flared hot despite the cold and the pain. "That's the same thing," Callum hissed. "You knew what he would think. You knew what would happen, and you let it because you wanted that land more than you valued what we had." Dane's eyes snapped back to him, and now there was fire in them, real emotion breaking through the ice. "You have no idea what I valued. You were 19 and still believed the world was fair. I was trying to survive and build something that wouldn't blow away in the first hard wind." His voice dropped, going rough. "And what we had, that was never going to work, Callum. You know that as well as I do." The words struck like a fist, and Callum felt his face heat despite the cold. They had never spoken about it directly, never acknowledged what had been building between them that last summer before everything fell apart. The way Dane's hand would linger on his shoulder, the way Callum found excuses to ride out to Dane's camp. The night they had sat by the fire, and Callum had leaned close enough to feel Dane's breath on his face before Dane pulled back and rode away without a word. "Don't," Callum whispered. "Don't pretend that had anything to do with the land." Dane's face was so close now that Callum could see the individual whiskers in his beard, could see the tiny scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood fall. "You chose your future over me." That's all it was. Simple arithmetic. Dane's hand moved from Callum's shoulder to his face, rough fingers cupping his jaw, and Callum's breath stopped. "It wasn't simple," Dane said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing about you was ever simple." His thumb brushed across Callum's cheekbone, and Callum felt his heart slam against his ribs. "But I couldn't give you what you wanted. Not then. Not when we would have lost everything." "What I wanted," Callum repeated. His own hand came up, pressing against Dane's chest, feeling the solid beat of his heart. "You never asked what I wanted. You just decided for both of us, like you always did. Like you're doing right now, keeping me alive whether I want it or not." Dane's jaw clenched, and he pulled back slightly, though his hand remained on Callum's face. "You want to know what you wanted? You wanted us to run off together like it was some damn fairy tale. You wanted to build a life somewhere nobody knew us, and we could pretend the world didn't exist. His voice roughened with emotion. But I couldn't do that to you. Couldn't let you throw away your family, your inheritance, everything your father worked for, just because you thought you loved me. Thought I loved you, Callum echoed, anger flaring hot despite his weakness. I didn't think anything. I knew. I knew it the summer I turned 17, and you taught me to break horses. I knew it every time you looked at me like I was something more than just the neighbor kid. I knew it the night we sat by the creek and you almost kissed me before you got scared and rode away. His breath came faster, each word costing him. Don't you dare tell me I didn't know my own heart. The fire crackled and popped, sending shadows dancing across Dane's face. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at Callum with eyes that held years of regret and longing. Then his shoulders sagged, and he looked away. You're right, he said quietly. You knew, and that terrified me more than anything else. Because I knew too, and I couldn't see any way it ended well for either of us. Callum felt tears burn hot behind his eyes, but refused to let them fall. So you chose to end it before it really began. Chose to cut me out and walk away and let me think you were just another greedy rancher who cared more about land than people. Oh, do you have any idea what that did to me? Watching you ride off with that deed in your pocket, knowing my father believed you over me? Dane's head snapped back to him, pain etched deep in every line of his face. Yes, he said harshly. I know exactly what it did, because I watched you. I rode past your property line every damn week for a year, just to catch a glimpse of you. I saw you working yourself half to death, trying to make up for the lost pasture. Saw the way you stopped smiling. Saw you turn hard and cold, and I knew I did that to you. His voice cracked. And it killed me, but I thought it was better than the alternative. Better than watching you destroyed by scandal and hatred. What alternative? Callum demanded. What did you think would happen if we were together? Dane's expression turned bleak. Why, I thought they would run you out of town. Thought your father would disown you. Thought you would end up alone and broken with nothing but me, and eventually you would hate me for it anyway. At least this way you kept your family, your ranch, your reputation. You just lost me. The words hung between them, heavy with the weight of 5 years of suffering. Callum understood then that Dane had been trying to protect him in the only way he knew how, by becoming the villain so Callum could stay the victim. By taking all the blame and all the hatred, so Callum's family would never question why they had been so close. It was twisted and wrong and born of fear. But it came from a place of care, and even if the execution had destroyed them both. You were wrong, Callum said finally, his voice steady despite the tears he could no longer hold back. You were wrong about what I could survive and what would destroy me. Losing the land hurt, but losing you was what broke me. Every morning I woke up hating myself for still wanting you. Every night I dreamed about you and woke up feeling like I had betrayed myself. The wound in his side throbbed in time with his heartbeat, but he ignored it. You thought you were protecting me, but all you did was teach me that I wasn't worth fighting for. Dane made a sound like he had been gut-punched, and suddenly his arms were around Callum again, crushing him close despite the risk to his wound. No, Dane breathed against his hair. God, no. You were always worth fighting for. You were the only thing worth fighting for. I was just too much of a coward to do it. Too afraid of losing you to the world's judgment, so I lost you to my own stupidity instead. His whole body trembled. I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry, Callum. Callum wrapped his arms around Dane's waist, holding tight despite the pain it caused. He pressed his face against Dane's bare chest and let himself cry for the first time in 5 years. Let out all the grief and rage and loneliness he had been carrying. Dane held him through it, one hand cradling his head, the other pressed against his back, murmuring broken apologies and promises into his hair. When the storm of emotion finally passed, Callum pulled back enough to look at Dane's face. He saw his own pain reflected there, saw tears tracking through the grime and ash on Dane's cheeks. They were a mess, both of them, scarred and broken and bleeding. But they were alive and they were together, and maybe that was enough to start rebuilding on. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Callum said honestly. "Not yet. Not after everything. But I want to try. I want to believe we can find our way back to something good." His hand came up to wipe away Dane's tears with gentle fingers. "Can you give me time? Can you be patient while I figure out how to trust you again?" Dane caught his hand and pressed a kiss to his palm, his lips warm and soft. "I'll give you all the time you need," he promised. "I'll spend the rest of my life earning back what I threw away if that's what it takes." His gray eyes held Callum's gaze with an intensity that stole breath. "Just don't give up on us completely. Don't close that door forever." "I won't," Callum whispered. "The door's still open, just barely, but it's open." They stayed like that for a long moment, foreheads pressed together, breathing in sync. The fire burned low, and the cold crept closer, but the warmth between their bodies held it at bay. Callum felt exhaustion pulling at him again, the combination of blood loss and emotional upheaval draining his remaining strength. "Sleep now," Dane murmured, guiding Callum back down to lie against him. "We can talk more when you're stronger, when we're both thinking clearly." He arranged them carefully, mindful of the wound, and wrapped both coats around them again. "For now, just rest. Let me keep you warm and alive, and tomorrow we'll figure out the rest." Callum closed his eyes, but sleep would not come easily. His mind kept circling back to that summer when everything changed, when he went from seeing Dane as just the older rancher next door to something infinitely more complicated. He remembered the exact moment he understood what he was feeling. They had been swimming in the creek to escape the heat, and when Dane climbed out, water streaming down his body, the sunlight catching on the droplets, Callum had felt his stomach drop in a way that had nothing to do with hunger or sickness. "What are you thinking about?" Dane asked softly, his breath stirring Callum's hair. Callum hesitated, then decided honesty was worth the risk. "That day at the creek," he said, "when I finally understood what I was feeling for you, I was so terrified I could barely look at you for a week after. Kept thinking you would somehow know just by looking at me, that you would be disgusted or angry or worse, that you would laugh." Dane's arms tightened around him. "I knew," he said quietly. "Maybe not that exact day, but sometime around then. Oh, you started looking at me different. Started finding reasons to touch my hand or shoulder. Started watching me when you thought I wasn't paying attention." His voice roughened. "And God help me, I loved it. Loved knowing you wanted me even though I knew nothing could come of it." "Why not?" Callum asked. "Why did you decide nothing could happen before we even tried?" Dane was silent for so long, Callum thought he would not answer. Then he sighed, the sound carrying the weight of years. "Because I saw what happened to Tom Garrett and his friend from back east. Saw them run out of town on a rail, tarred and feathered, beaten half to death just for sharing a room at the boarding house. I watched them leave with blood running down their faces, and I swore I would never let that happen to you." Callum's breath caught. "I didn't know," he whispered. "When I was too young then, I guess. Didn't understand what was happening." Dane's hand stroked through his hair, the gesture soothing. "You were 14. Your father kept you sheltered from the uglier parts of town justice. But I was 18, and I saw everything. Saw how fast a mob could form, how quickly people you thought were decent could turn into animals. It scared me more than anything ever had." The confession explained so much. Dane's sudden distance that summer, the way he would pull back every time they got close. The fear in his eyes when Callum had leaned in by the fire that night. He had not been rejecting Callum. He had been trying to protect him from a violence Callum had not even known to fear. "I wish you had told me," Callum said. Wish you had trusted me enough to explain instead of just pushing me away. Maybe I would have understood. Maybe we could have been more careful, found a way to be together without the whole town knowing. Dane's laugh was bitter. You were 19 and in love and convinced we could conquer anything. If I had told you the truth, you would have wanted to fight, wanted to prove everyone wrong. And I couldn't risk that. Couldn't risk you. So you risked us instead, Callum said. Chose what you thought was safety over what we both wanted. Dane nodded against his hair. I chose wrong, he admitted. I see that now. I thought I was being noble, being protective. But really I was just being afraid. And my fear cost us 5 years. His voice broke slightly. Cost us everything we could have had. The lamplight flickered and nearly died, plunging them into near darkness. Dane reached out and adjusted the wick, bringing the flame back stronger. In the renewed light, Callum saw tears tracking down Dane's face, cutting through the grime and stubble. He had never seen Dane cry before, had never imagined this strong, hard man capable of such raw emotion. Why not? Callum breathed. Why couldn't you just let me go? Dane's hand tightened on his jaw, fingers pressing into his skin, and when he spoke, his voice was raw with something that sounded almost like anguish. Because 5 years isn't long enough to stop caring whether you live or die. Because I still dream about that summer and wake up hating myself for walking away. Because you're under my skin like a splinter I can't dig out no matter how hard I try. Dane's eyes closed, his jaw clenching. And because if you died out there, I would spend the rest of my life knowing I killed you, just as surely as if I pulled the trigger myself. The confession hung between them, raw and bleeding. Callum stared at Dane's face, at the lines of pain carved deep around his mouth, and felt something shift in his chest. The hatred was still there. 5 years of it built up like scar tissue, but underneath it was something older. Something that remembered how it felt to sit beside Dane on a summer evening and believe the future held nothing but possibility. You hurt me, Callum said finally. You chose land over me, and that hurt worse than any bullet. Dane's eyes opened, meeting his, and Callum saw his own pain reflected there. But you came back for me anyway. You dragged me through a blizzard and gave me your warmth, even though I swore I would see you dead. His hand pressed harder against Dane's chest. Why? Dane was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled back just enough to look Callum full in the face. Because some things are worth saving, even if they hate you for it, even if they never forgive you. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. And because maybe I've spent 5 years being wrong. The lamplight flickered, shadows dancing across the rough walls. Outside, the wind screamed its fury and snow piled against the door. Inside this tiny shelter, 2 men lay wrapped together, skin to skin, sharing heat and breath and words that tasted like truth for the first time in years. Callum felt the warmth of Dane's body seeping into him, chasing away the last of the cold. And he understood that this moment was a crossroads. He could cling to his hatred, nurse it through the night and into however many years he had left. Or he could let it go and see what remained underneath. His hand moved from Dane's chest to his neck, fingers sliding into the damp hair at his nape. Dane went very still, barely breathing, waiting. Callum pulled him closer, just an inch, testing. Dane came without resistance, and their lips met in a kiss that was nothing like the sweet fumbling of youth. This was fierce and desperate, tasting of blood and melted snow and 5 years of wanting what could not be had. Dane made a sound low in his throat, and his arms tightened around Callum, careful of the wound but still powerful enough to make Callum feel small and protected all at once. The kiss deepened, and Callum opened to it. He letting Dane in, tasting the heat of his mouth. It hurt in a way that had nothing to do with the bullet hole in his side and everything to do with the wounds they had carved into each other with words and silence and pride. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Dane's forehead pressed against Callum's again, and his hand cradled the back of Callum's skull. "This doesn't fix anything," he said roughly. 5 years of damage doesn't disappear because we want it to. "I know," Callum whispered, "but maybe we start over. Maybe we figure out what's worth saving." He felt Dane nod, felt the tremor that ran through that powerful body. The storm still raged outside, and the night stretched long and dangerous ahead of them. But here in this moment, wrapped in coats and arms and possibilities, Callum thought maybe they had found something worth the fight. Dane kissed him again, softer this time, with a tenderness that made Callum's chest ache. Then he settled them both more comfortably, Callum's head against his shoulder, their bodies fitting together like they were made for this. The warmth between them built and held, and Callum felt his eyes growing heavy. "Sleep," Dane murmured against his hair. "I'll keep watch. I'll keep you warm. I've got you." And despite everything, despite 5 years of hatred and hurt, Callum believed him. He let his eyes close and drifted into sleep with Dane's heartbeat steady beneath his ear and the promise of morning waiting somewhere beyond the storm. Callum woke to silence. The storm had stopped and pale light filtered through the gaps in the shack's walls, turning the darkness to gray. He was still wrapped against Dane's chest, still feeling the steady rise and fall of breath beneath his cheek. And for a moment, he let himself exist in that space between sleep and waken, where nothing had to be decided yet. Then the pain in his side flared sharp and real, and memory came flooding back. The bullet, the blizzard, the kiss. He shifted slightly, and Dane's arms tightened around him, holding him close even in sleep. Callum tilted his head back to look at Dane's face and found him already awake, gray eyes watching him with an intensity that made Callum's breath catch. "How long have you been staring at me?" Callum asked, his voice rough from sleep. "Long enough to make sure you were still breathing," Dane answered. His hand moved to Callum's forehead, checking for fever. "You feel cooler. That's good. How's the pain?" Callum considered lying, considered claiming he felt fine, but the truth was written in the way he could barely move, without agony lancing through him, like someone lit a fire in my ribs and forgot to put it out. "But I'm alive, thanks to you." Dane's expression flickered, something soft passing across his features before the usual hardness returned. "We're not out of this yet. The storm stopped, but that doesn't mean it's safe to move. We need to wait for full light, and I need to check that wound again." He carefully unwound himself from Callum, the loss of his warmth immediate and shocking. Callum bit back a sound of protest as cold air hit his bare skin. Dane stood and stretched, his body a study in controlled power, muscles shifting beneath scarred skin. He pulled on his shirt, the fabric straining across his shoulders. Z then reached for his coat. Callum watched him move around the small space, checking the door, peering through gaps at the world beyond. Snow had piled against the walls in drifts taller than a man, and the sky beyond was the pale blue of winter morning, clear and merciless. "Storm passed just before dawn," Dane said without turning. "We've got maybe 6 hours of good light to get down the mountain." He came back to Callum and knelt beside him, gentle hands unwrapping the makeshift bandage. The wound looked angry in the daylight, edges purple and swollen, but no red streaks spread from it, and the bleeding had stopped completely. Dane touched the skin around it with careful fingers, and Callum hissed, "Still hot. You might be fighting infection, but it's not bad yet." He rewrapped it with strips torn from what remained of their shirts. His touch sure and practiced. Callum studied his face while he worked, looking for some sign of what had shifted between them in the dark. But Dane's expression was unreadable, focused entirely on the task. When he finished, he sat back on his heels and met Callum's gaze. "About last night," Dane started, then stopped. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words too difficult to swallow. "What happened between us?" Callum's heart kicked against his ribs. "Don't," he interrupted. Don't you dare tell me it was a mistake or that it meant nothing. I won't believe you." Dane's eyes flashed. "I wasn't going to say that." His hand reached out, cupping Callum's face with a tenderness that made Callum's throat tight. "I was going to say it scared the hell out of me. 5 years I spent trying to bury what I felt, and one night stripped it all away." Oh, he leaned closer, his breath warm on Callum's face. "I don't know how to do this, how to want you and keep you safe and build something that won't fall apart the first time we disagree. Then we figure it out together," Callum said. He caught Dane's wrist, holding his hand against his cheek. "We stop trying to do it alone, and we actually talk instead of making decisions for each other." His thumb stroked over Dane's pulse point. "You walked away 5 years ago because you thought it was the smart choice. Maybe it was, but it was also the coward's choice, and I know you're no coward." Dane made a rough sound, half laugh and half something darker. "You always could see right through me. Even when we were kids and I was trying to act tough. You knew." His forehead touched Callum's. "I missed that. Missed having someone who actually knew me instead of just the reputation." "I missed you too," Callum admitted. "Even when I hated you, I missed you. Missed the way you used to make me laugh. Missed riding out to check the herds together and talking about nothing and everything. Missed believing that someone understood what I wanted before I even knew myself." The confession felt like opening a wound, but also like letting poison drain. 5 years is a long time to carry that kind of weight. Dane kissed him then, slow and deep, and Callum opened to it despite the pain it caused to move. This kiss was different from the desperate clash of the night before. This was a promise, a beginning, something that tasted like hope and possibility. When they broke apart, Dane rested his forehead against Callum's, both of them breathing hard. "Oh, we should get moving," Dane said finally. "The longer we wait, the more dangerous it gets." "Can you stand?" Callum nodded, though truthfully he was not sure. Dane helped him up, supporting most of his weight, and Callum gritted his teeth against the wave of dizziness that crashed over him. His legs felt like water, and the wound pulled with every movement, but he stayed upright through sheer stubbornness. Dane bundled him into his coat, then wrapped his own around both of them, creating a shared warmth. They stepped out into a world transformed. Snow stretched in every direction, pristine and blinding under the morning sun. The peaks rose sharp against the blue sky, and the air was so cold it burned to breathe. Beautiful and deadly in equal measure. The trek down the mountain was agony. Every step jarred Callum's wound and sent fresh fire through his side. Dane kept one arm locked around him, practically carrying him through the deep snow, and Callum focused on putting one foot in front of the other and not passing out. Time became meaningless again. Just the endless white and the mechanical push forward, and Dane's solid presence keeping him from falling. They were maybe halfway down when Callum's legs finally gave out. He collapsed into the snow and could not get back up no matter how hard he tried. Dane crouched beside him, concern etched deep in his face. "Callum, stay with me. We're almost there, just a little further." But Callum's vision was graying at the edges, and his whole body felt like it was made of lead. "Can't," he gasped. "Go on without me. Get help and come back." Dane's face went hard as stone. Like hell. His arms slid under Callum, lifting him clean off the ground, and Callum wanted to protest, but he had no strength left. Dane carried him like he weighed nothing, his breathing steady despite the exertion, and Callum's head lolled against his shoulder. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, Callum felt Dane's heart beating strong and fast, felt the flex of muscle as Dane navigated the treacherous slope, felt the determination radiating from him like heat. This man who had betrayed him, who had walked away 5 years ago, was now willing to carry him down a mountain in the freezing cold rather than leave him behind. The contradiction made Callum's chest ache. Time blurred. Callum drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of movement and cold and Dane's voice rumbling through his chest, saying things Callum could not quite make out. Then, suddenly, there were other voices. The sound of horses, hands pulling him from Dane's arms. He tried to hold on, panicking at the separation, but Dane's voice cut through the confusion. "It's okay. These are my men. They'll get you to town, to the doctor. You're safe now." Callum forced his eyes open and found Dane's face above him. "Don't leave," he managed. "Please don't leave me." Dane's expression softened, and he leaned down, pressing his lips to Callum's forehead. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll ride right beside you all the way to redemption. I promise." Then Callum was being lifted onto a horse, secured in front of one of Dane's ranch hands, and Dane swung up onto his own mount beside them. The ride to town was a nightmare of jolting pain and fading consciousness. Callum clung to awareness by focusing on Dane riding next to him, keeping pace, his eyes constantly checking to make sure Callum was still breathing. When they finally reached redemption, the doctor was already waiting, summoned by a rider Dane had sent ahead. Callum was carried into the surgery and laid on a table, and then there were hands examining him, voices discussing his condition, and the sharp smell of carbolic acid. Through it all, Dane stood in the corner, arms crossed, face granite hard. The doctor worked quickly, cleaning and stitching the wound properly, wrapping it in clean bandages, forcing water and medicine down Callum's throat. "You're lucky," the doctor said, his weathered face grim. "Another hour in the cold, and you would have lost that fight. As it is, you'll need rest and care for at least 2 weeks before you're back on your feet." "He'll have it," Dane said from his corner. The doctor turned to look at him, one eyebrow raised. "He'll stay at my ranch where I can keep an eye on him." The doctor's expression suggested he knew exactly what kind of history lay between Dane Harrow and Callum Reeves. But he said nothing, just nodded and finished his work. When the doctor finally left them alone, Callum lay back on the bed and looked at Dane. "Your ranch," he said weakly. "You're taking me to your ranch, after everything." Dane moved to the bedside, his hand finding Callum's and gripping it tight. "Where else would you go? Your place is 15 miles from town and you can barely move. At least my ranch has people who can help if you need it." Callum wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled at him like an anchor. "Fine," he whispered, "but only because I don't have the strength to fight you right now." Dane's smile was small but genuine. "I'll take what I can get." He settled into the chair beside the bed, still holding Callum's hand. "Sleep. I'll be here when you wake up." And he was. Every time Callum surfaced from the depths of medicated sleep, he found Dane there, keeping watch like a guardian carved from stone. Sometimes Dane was reading, sometimes just staring at the wall, but always present, always within reach. It made something warm and painful bloom in Callum's chest. This proof that Dane meant what he said about not leaving. 3 days passed in that room above the doctor's surgery. 3 days of fever and pain and slow healing. 3 days of Dane bringing him broth and water, helping him sit up, reading to him from old newspapers when Callum was too restless to sleep. 3 days of hands touching more than necessary, of eyes meeting and holding, of words spoken in the dark when defenses were low. The second night, when fever had Callum shaking and delirious, Dane climbed into the narrow bed beside him and held him through the worst of it. Callum remembered fragments, Dane's cool hands on his burning skin, his voice low and soothing, talking about anything and nothing, just to give Callum something to focus on. He talked about his ranch, about the new foals born that spring, about the plans he had for expanding the herd. And underneath it all was the unspoken message. "I'm here. You're not alone. I won't let you slip away." When the fever finally broke just before dawn, Callum found himself curled against Dane's chest, their legs tangled together, Dane's arm wrapped protectively around him. He should have pulled away. He should have put distance between them, but instead, he pressed closer and let himself feel safe for the first time in years. Dane's hand stroked through his sweat-damp hair, and neither of them spoke, just existed in that quiet moment of shared relief. On the third day, Callum was strong enough to sit in the chair by the window and look out at the street below. He watched people go about their lives, merchants opening shops, children running between buildings, women with baskets heading to market. Normal life continuing while his own had been completely upended. Dane sat on the edge of the bed watching him with those intent gray eyes. "What are you thinking?" Dane asked quietly. Callum turned from the window. "About how different everything looks now. 3 days ago I would have crossed the street to avoid talking to you. Would have rather died than ask you for help. And now here I am in your debt, wearing clothes you bought, eating food you paid for, about to go live on your ranch. It feels like I stepped into someone else's life." Dane's expression softened. "You're not in my debt. Saving your life wasn't a transaction. It was..." He paused, searching for words. "It was me choosing not to live with your death on my conscience. Choosing to be brave for once instead of letting fear make my decisions." His hand reached out, fingers threading through Callum's. "If anything, I'm in your debt for giving me another chance I don't deserve." "Maybe we're even then," Callum said. "Both of us carrying debts we can never really repay. Both of us trying to figure out how to move forward instead of staying stuck in the past." He squeezed Dane's hand. "I'm scared, though. Scared of hoping this is real and having it fall apart again. Scared of what people will say when they figure out what we are to each other." Dane pulled him close, carefully mindful of the healing wound. "Let me be scared for both of us," he murmured into Callum's hair. "You just focus on healing and getting your strength back. I'll handle the rest of the world. And if anyone has a problem with us, they can take it up with me directly." Callum allowed himself to lean into that strength, to trust that maybe this time Dane would not run when things got difficult. That evening, the doctor came to check the wound one final time before releasing Callum to Dane's care. He unwrapped the bandages and examined the angry red line with professional detachment. "Healing clean," he pronounced. "No signs of infection. You'll have a scar, but you'll live. You keep it dry, change the dressing daily, and don't do anything stupid for at least 2 weeks." He looked pointedly at Dane. "That means no riding, no heavy lifting, no strenuous activity of any kind." Dane nodded solemnly, though Callum saw amusement flicker in his eyes. "I'll make sure he behaves." The doctor snorted. "That'll be a first for either of you." He packed up his instruments and headed for the door, then paused and looked back at them. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I'm glad you found each other again. Life's too short to waste on pride and old grudges." Then he was gone, leaving them alone in the lamplight. On the 4th day, Callum woke feeling clearer than he had since the bullet tore through him. The fever had broken sometime in the night, and the pain had receded to a dull throb instead of the constant fire. He sat up carefully and found Dane asleep in the chair, head tilted back, face relaxed in a way it never was when awake. Callum watched him, cataloging the changes 5 years had carved, the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair, the way his hands, even in sleep, stayed ready to reach for a weapon. Those hands had held him, had carried him down a mountain, had washed blood from his skin with surprising gentleness. Callum reached out and traced one finger along Dane's jaw, feeling the rasp of his beard. Dane's eyes opened instantly, alert in a heartbeat, and found Callum watching him. "Mornin'," Callum said softly. "You should sleep in a real bed instead of that chair." "Can't," Dane answered, his voice rough. "Might miss something if I'm not close." His hand came up to cover Callum's where it rested against his face. "How do you feel?" "Better. Strong enough to have a real conversation about what happens next." Dane's expression turned wary, but he nodded. "What do you want to know?" Everything, Callum said. I want to know what really happened 5 years ago. I want to know why you walked away. I want to know if this, he gestured between them, if this is real or just something that happened because we were scared and alone. Dane was quiet for a long moment, his thumb stroking over Callum's knuckles. Then he took a breath and started talking. The night I rode into town and your father accused me of stealing cattle, Dane said slowly. I didn't deny it because technically it was true. Some of my herd had mixed with yours and I took them back without asking permission. But it wasn't theft. It was me being stupid and proud and not wanting to admit I needed help sorting them. He looked down at their joined hands. Your father was furious and he had every right to be. So when he demanded payment, I offered the only thing I had that he wanted. Water rights to the west pasture. Callum felt his stomach drop. You gave it up willingly. You weren't forced. Dane shook his head. I was 23 years old, trying to run a ranch by myself after my father died. I made a bad choice and I paid for it. But I didn't lie about what happened. I just didn't explain that the cattle mixing was an accident, not intentional theft. Your father assumed the worst and I let him. And me? Callum asked, his voice tight. What about what we were starting to be? Did that factor in at all? Dane's eyes lifted to his face and Callum saw pain there, real and raw. That was the whole reason I gave up the land so easily. I knew if I fought it, if I dragged it out, eventually someone would start asking questions about why I spent so much time on your ranch, why I was always finding excuses to see you. Callum's breath caught. You were protecting me, protecting us. Dane nodded. I was young and scared and stupid. I thought if I just walked away, if I put distance between us, then nobody would suspect. Nobody would ruin your reputation or drag your family through scandal. So I took the hit and rode out and tried to forget. His voice cracked on the last word. But I couldn't forget. 5 years, and I still dream about you. Tears burned hot behind Callum's eyes. I thought you chose land over me. Thought you proved that nothing mattered to you except building your empire. I spent 5 years hating you for something you did to protect me. The realization was crushing, the weight of wasted years pressing down on his chest. We're both idiots. Dane laughed, short and bitter. Yeah, we are. He stood and moved to the window, staring out at the street below. But I don't know how to make it right, Callum. The land is gone. Your father died believing I betrayed him. Half the county thinks we're enemies, and the other half doesn't care. How do we come back from that? Callum pushed himself up despite the protest from his wound. We start by being honest. We stop hiding and making decisions alone. And we accept that some people won't understand and won't approve. His voice strengthened. I've spent 5 years being angry and alone and it hasn't made me happy. Maybe it's time to try something else. Maybe it's time to stop caring what everyone thinks and just live. Dane turned back to him, hope and fear worn on his face. You mean that? You would be willing to face down the whole town? Callum met his eyes steadily. For you? Yes. If you're willing to do the same. If you're willing to fight for this instead of running away the first time it gets hard. Dane crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Callum into a kiss that tasted like promise and desperation and years of wanting. Callum kissed him back with everything he had, pouring 5 years of loneliness and anger and longing into it. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Dane's hands cradled Callum's face like he was something precious. I'll fight, Dane said fiercely. I'll fight the whole damn territory if that's what it takes. I'm done running. I'm done pretending I don't want you. His forehead pressed to Callum's. But you have to promise me something. Promise you won't shut me out. When things get hard, when we fight, because we will fight, promise you'll stay and work through it instead of walking away. I promise, Callum whispered. As long as you promise the same. No more making decisions for me. No more sacrificing yourself to protect me. We do this together or not at all. Dane nodded, his eyes bright with something that might have been tears. Together he agreed. Then he kissed Callum again, softer this time, with a tenderness that made Callum's heart ache. 2 weeks later, Callum stood on the porch of Dane's ranch, watching the sun set over the mountains they had nearly died on. His wound had healed to an angry red scar, and he moved carefully, but without the constant pain. Dane came up behind him, sliding arms around his waist, and Callum leaned back into the solid warmth of him. "What are you thinking?" Dane asked quietly. Callum considered the question, looking out at the land spread before them. "About second chances," he said finally. "About how sometimes you have to nearly die to figure out what actually matters." He turned in Dane's arms to face him. "About how I'm glad you didn't leave me in that snow." Dane's smile was soft and real. "Best decision I ever made, even if you were bleeding all over me and cursing my name." Callum laughed, and the sound felt good, felt right. "I was not cursing your name. Much." Dane kissed him, slow and sweet, and Callum lost himself in the warmth of it. When they broke apart, the sun had dipped below the peaks and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Inside the ranch house, lamplight glowed warm and welcoming. Dane's ranch hands had accepted Callum's presence with varying degrees of surprise and curiosity, but nobody had said anything against it. Not when Dane made it clear Callum was staying. Not when they saw the way Dane looked at him. "Come on," Dane said, tugging Callum toward the door. "Supper's getting cold." Callum followed him inside, into the warmth and light, and thought about all the years he had wasted being angry. All the time lost to pride and fear and misunderstanding. But they had now. They had this moment, and all the moments stretching ahead, and that was enough. That night, Callum lay in Dane's bed, wrapped in his arms, listening to his steady breathing in the dark. The wound in his side pulled slightly when he moved, but it was healing clean. The wound in his heart, the one carved by 5 years of betrayal and loneliness, that was healing too, slowly, carefully, with every honest word and gentle touch. Dane's hand moved over his ribs, tracing the edge of the bandage. "Does it still hurt?" he murmured. Callum considered lying, but they had promised honesty. "A little, but it's better. You're a good nurse," Dane snorted. "Never thought I would be patching up the man I once considered my greatest rival." "Is that what I was?" Callum asked. "Your greatest rival?" Dane was quiet for a moment. "No," he said finally. "You were the one I measured myself against. The one I wanted to impress. The one I couldn't stop thinking about even when I tried." He pressed a kiss to Callum's shoulder. "You were never my rival. You were always something more. I just didn't know how to name it." "And now," Callum whispered. "Now what am I?" Dane pulled him closer, their bodies fitting together perfectly. "Now you're mine," he said simply, "if you want to be." Callum turned in his arms until they were face to face in the darkness. "I want to be," he confirmed, "as long as you're mine too." "Always have been," Dane answered. "Even when I pretended otherwise. Even when I walked away. You've had my heart since we were kids, and I didn't know what that meant." His voice dropped lower. "I know now, and I'm not letting go again." They kissed in the darkness, slow and thorough, and Callum felt warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the blankets or the fire in the hearth. This was the warmth of being wanted, being chosen, being held by someone who saw all his flaws and scars and wanted him anyway. It was terrifying and exhilarating and more precious than any piece of land. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters, but inside they were safe and warm and together. Callum thought about the storm that had nearly killed him, about bleeding into the snow and begging Dane for help, about the moment he realized Dane had come back for him, had chosen to save him despite everything. That moment had been a gift, even if it was wrapped in pain and fear. Some things are worth almost dying for, Callum said into the quiet. Dane's arms tightened around him. Don't even joke about that. The thought of losing you, his voice roughened. I can't go through that again. Callum pressed a kiss to his throat. You won't have to. I'm not going anywhere. I survived a bullet in a blizzard. I can survive anything as long as you're with me. Dane made a sound that was half laugh and half something deeper. Together then. No matter what comes. Callum nodded against his chest. Together he agreed, and he knew it was a promise they would both keep. The future stretched ahead uncertain and probably difficult. People would talk. Some would judge. Others would turn away. But they had survived the worst and come out the other side stronger for it. As Callum drifted towards sleep, he thought about the title to the West pasture, still in Dane's name, still representing 5 years of bitter feelings. Tomorrow he would ride over to look at it, would stand on that land and decide if it mattered anymore. Probably it didn't. Probably what mattered was the man holding him, the warmth they shared, the future they were building together from the broken pieces of the past. The last thing Callum felt before sleep claimed him was Dane's hand over his heart, the fingers splayed wide, and Dane's voice murmuring against his hair. Thank you for not dying on me. Thank you for giving me another chance. Thank you for being stubborn enough to survive. Callum smiled in the darkness and let himself fall into dreams that were warm and bright and full of possibility. Morning came soft and golden, sunlight streaming through the window. Callum woke to find Dane already up, standing by the window looking out at the ranch yard. He watched for a moment, admiring the strong lines of his back, the way the light caught in his dark hair. Then Dane turned and caught him looking, and smiled, real and unguarded. Morning, Dane said, coming back to the bed. How's the wound? Callum stretched carefully. Better every day. I think I might actually live. Dane sat on the edge of the bed and took his hand. Good, he said seriously, because I have plans for you and they require you to be alive and healthy. Oh, Callum raised an eyebrow. What kind of plans? Dane's smile turned wicked. The kind that involve you staying right here in my bed for the foreseeable future. The kind that involve me making up for 5 years of not having you. The kind that involved me showing you exactly how much I missed you. Heat flared in Callum's stomach, and he pulled Dane down into a kiss that promised he was very much on board with those plans. When they finally came up for air, Dane rested his forehead against Callum's. I love you, he said quietly. I should have said it 5 years ago. Should have fought for you instead of walking away. But I'm saying it now. I love you, Callum Reeves, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it. Callum's throat went tight with emotion. I love you too, he managed. Even when I hated you, I loved you. Even when I swore I would never forgive you. His hand cupped Dane's jaw. You saved my life out there in that storm, but you gave me back something more important. You gave me hope. They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other as the morning light grew stronger. Outside, they could hear the ranch come into life, the sounds of horses and men starting the day's work. But inside this room, time seemed to slow, giving them space to simply exist together, without walls or secrets or fear. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Callum healed slowly, his strength returning day by day. Dane was patient and careful, helping him walk the length of the porch, then out to the barn, then around the property. They worked side by side when Callum was strong enough, mending fences and checking cattle, falling into an easy rhythm that felt like it had always existed. At night, they lay together in Dane's bed and talked about everything they had missed in 5 years. Callum told him about the drought that nearly broke his ranch, about his father's death and the loneliness that followed. Dane told him about the winter wolves killed half his herd, about the barn fire that almost cost him everything, about the nights he sat alone wondering if he had made the right choice. And slowly, carefully, they built something new on the foundation of what had been broken. Not perfect, not without scars, but real and solid and true. When people in town started to notice, started to whisper and point, Dane simply took Callum's hand in public and dared anyone to say something to his face. Most didn't. A few turned away, but enough smiled and nodded that Callum began to believe maybe they could have this. Maybe the world had changed enough to let them be. They kissed in the darkness, slow and thorough, and Callum felt warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the blankets or the fire in the hearth. This was the warmth of being wanted, being chosen, being held by someone who saw all his flaws and scars and wanted him anyway. It was terrifying and exhilarating and more precious than any piece of land. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters, but inside, they were safe and warm and together. Callum thought about the storm that had nearly killed him, about bleeding into the snow and begging Dane for help. About the moment he realized Dane had come back for him, had chosen to save him despite everything. That moment had been a gift, even if it was wrapped in pain and fear. Some things are worth almost dying for, Callum said into the quiet. Dane's arms tightened around him. Don't even joke about that. The thought of losing you, his voice roughened. I can't go through that again. Callum pressed a kiss to his throat. You won't have to. I'm not going anywhere. I survived a bullet and a blizzard. I can survive anything as long as you're with me. Dane made a sound that was half laugh and half something deeper. Together then, no matter what comes. Callum nodded against his chest. Together he agreed. And he knew it was a promise they would both keep. The future stretched ahead uncertain and probably difficult. People would talk. Some would judge. Others would turn away. But they had survived the worst and come out the other side stronger for it. As Callum drifted toward sleep, he thought about the title to the West Pasture, still in Dane's name, still representing 5 years of bitter feelings. Tomorrow he would ride over to look at it, would stand on that land and decide if it mattered anymore. Probably it didn't. Probably what mattered was the man holding him, the warmth they shared, the future they were building together from the broken pieces of the past. The last thing Callum felt before sleep claimed him was Dane's hand over his heart, fingers splayed wide, and Dane's voice murmuring against his hair. Thank you for not dying on me. Thank you for giving me another chance. Thank you for being stubborn enough to survive. Callum smiled in the darkness and let himself fall into dreams that were warm and bright and full of possibility. Morning came soft and golden, sunlight streaming through the window. Callum woke to find Dane already up, standing by the window looking out at the ranch yard. He watched for a moment, admiring the strong lines of his back, the way the light caught in his dark hair. Then Dane turned and caught him looking and smiled, real and unguarded. Morning, Dane said, coming back to the bed. How's the wound? Callum stretched carefully. Better every day. I think I might actually live. Dane sat on the edge of the bed and took his hand. Good, he said seriously, because I have plans for you, and they require you to be alive and healthy. Oh, Callum raised an eyebrow. What kind of plans? Dane's smile turned wicked. The kind that involve you staying right here in my bed for the foreseeable future. The kind that involve me making up for 5 years of not having you. The kind that involve me showing you exactly how much I missed you. Heat flared in Callum's stomach and he pulled Dane down into a kiss that promised he was very much on board with those plans. When they finally came up for air, Dane rested his forehead against Callum's. I love you, he said quietly. I should have said it 5 years ago, should have fought for you instead of walking away, but I'm saying it now. I love you, Callum Reeves, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it." Callum's throat went tight with emotion. "I love you too," he managed. "Even when I hated you, I loved you. Even when I swore I would never forgive you." His hand cupped Dane's jaw. You saved my life out there in that storm, but you gave me back something more important. You gave me hope." They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other as the morning light grew stronger. Outside, they could hear the ranch coming to life, the sounds of horses and men starting the day's work. But inside this room, time seemed to slow, giving them space to simply exist together without walls or secrets or fear. Eventually, they had to get up, had to face the world and all its complications. But Callum knew now that whatever came, they would face it together. No more running, no more hiding, no more wasted years. Just two men who had found their way back to each other through blood and snow and the stubborn refusal to give up. As they dressed and prepared to start the day, Callum caught Dane's hand and pulled him close one more time. "Thank you," he said softly, "for not leaving me to die, for carrying me down that mountain, for giving us another chance." Dane kissed him thoroughly. "Thank you for being worth saving," he answered, "for being brave enough to forgive me, for choosing to stay." They walked out onto the porch together, hands linked, and looked out at the land spread before them. The mountains rose sharp and beautiful against the blue sky. The same mountains that had nearly claimed Callum's life, but they had survived, and now those peaks were just another part of the landscape, a reminder of what they had overcome. "This is home now," Dane said quietly, "if you want it to be." Callum squeezed his hand. "Yes," he said simply, "this is home. Not because of the land or the house or the ranch, but because you're here, because we're together. That's what makes it home." And it was true. After years of loneliness and anger, after nearly dying in the snow, after all the pain and misunderstanding, Callum had finally found his way home. Not to a place, but to a person. To the man who had saved his life and stolen his heart and was now offering him a future worth fighting for. Together they stood and watched the sun climb higher, painting the world in gold and promise. The scars they carried, both visible and invisible, would always be part of them. But scars were proof of survival, proof that they had endured and emerged stronger. And sometimes Callum thought the best love stories were the ones that almost didn't happen. The ones that required blood and pain and nearly dying to finally come true. He looked at Dane and saw his whole future written in those gray eyes. It would not always be easy. There would be challenges and fights and moments of doubt, but they would face it all together. Two men who had learned the hard way that some things were worth any price. Worth bleeding for, worth nearly freezing to death for, worth 5 years of separation and pain, worth everything. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and snow from the high peaks, and Callum breathed it in deep. He was alive, he was loved, he was home, and that was more than enough. That was everything.